Although the thick fog and dense foliage prevent them from seeing further than just a couple of yards, they know the enemy is close. Suddenly, the silence is broken by the sound of gunfire. A rain of bullets starts flying through the air, striking paratroopers down. Wave after wave of NVA soldiers begin to attack their position, and the clash turns into a brutal close-quarters fight. Paratroopers fight hand-to-hand, using their bayonets, rifles, and even their bare hands to fend off the determined enemy. They get to taste the hell of the Vietnam Highlands in what would become one of the most brutal battles of the Vietnam War, the Battle of Dak To. In early 1967, the Central Highlands region of South Vietnam became a focal point of interest for both sides of the war. The Military Assistance Command gained intelligence about the buildup of enemy forces in the region and planned to send a task force to the region. Their mission would be to eliminate the enemy presence and cut the movement of North Vietnamese Army troops and equipment into South Vietnam from sanctuaries in Cambodia and Laos. On the other side, NVA commanders had plans of their own. They organized the deployment of large forces into the area, intending to surround and destroy smaller American units, primarily in the Kon province. Instead of waiting for the enemy to attack, the unit's commander, Major General William R. Pierce, took a more active approach, organizing search and destroy missions. On April 6, 1967, they commenced Operation Francis Marion. As weeks passed, such skirmishes became frequent. It became evident that the North Vietnamese were bringing significant forces to the region. Indeed, by June 1967, NVA incursions increased so much that MAC-V had to send reinforcements from the 173rd Airborne Brigade, commanded by General John R. Dean, to the region. The paratroopers were supported by Montagnard tribes trained by the Green Berets. The Central Highlands were covered by dense triple canopy jungle, which reduced visibility and made movement extremely difficult. The monsoon season, from May to October, with continuous rain and high humidity, only added to the misery. On top of that, U.S. troops were equipped with heavy loads, often carrying up to 100 pounds of gear, including ammunition, grenades, and personal items. Nicknamed elephant soldiers, they had to patrol dense jungles and steep, muddy hills. As summer progressed, clashes with NVA forces intensified, culminating in mid-June with a brutal encounter known as the Battle of the Slopes. During this battle, Alpha Company of the 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry encountered heavy resistance on Hill 1338. The fighting ended catastrophically, with more than half of the company killed. In response to the defeat, MAC-V ordered more troops to the region. 1st and 3rd Brigades of the 1st Air Cavalry Division and the elite South Vietnamese 1st Airborne Task Force. Strong American forces seemed to have forced the NVA to retreat, as by the end of the summer, contact with them significantly decreased. On October 11th, Operation Greeley was officially called over. However, it was just the calm before the gathering storm. In October 1967, the North Vietnamese returned, bringing the entire 1st Division with roughly 6,000 men. The division comprised 3 regiments, 24th, 32nd, and 66th, with another one in reserve, the 174th. The division was supported by the 40th Artillery Regiment. The reason why the NVAs deployed such a significant force was the plan to destroy the American units in the region and seize the base at Dak To. The master plan, however, was to provoke the Americans into bringing even more units to Central Highlands, thus reducing the strength of troops at major cities before the Tet Offensive planned for January next year. The proof of how thorough the North Vietnamese approach to this operation was the fact that during the battle, American soldiers discovered miles of elaborate tunnels, trenches, and bunkers. For some of these, it took more than 6 months to be built. Aware that the North Vietnamese had brought in such large forces into the region, the Americans responded by bringing back the rest of the 4th Infantry and the 173rd Airborne to the region around the town of Dak To deal with the NVAs. On October 12th, Operation MacArthur was launched. In November, the 173rd Airborne Brigade was tasked with search and destroy missions at Dak To and Hill 823. The area around these points was vital because it was near the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a key supply route for the North Vietnamese Army. As the paratroopers moved into position around Dak To, they encountered dense jungle and rugged terrain, which made it difficult to spot the enemy. The soldiers advanced cautiously, knowing the enemy could be hiding anywhere. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by gunfire. The enemy had been lying in wait, and the paratroopers found themselves under heavy fire. The soldiers quickly took cover and returned fire. The enemy was well prepared, having dug in and set up fortified positions, making it hard for paratroopers to advance. Still, the soldiers pressed on, determined to complete their mission. The brigade's artillery and air support played a crucial role in the battle. The artillery pounded enemy positions, while airstrikes targeted bunkers and supply caches. This support helped to weaken the enemy's defenses and ultimately allowed the paratroopers to move forward. After hours of fierce fighting, the paratroopers managed to break through the enemy lines. They cleared the area of enemy forces and destroyed several supply caches. The battle was costly, though, with many wounded and killed paratroopers. At Hill 823, Bravo Company of the 4th Battalion, 503rd Infantry Regiment, 173rd Airborne had a similar task: to clear the point of enemy presence and capture the top of the hill. This hill was particularly important as it had good control over the surrounding area and was thus suitable for establishing a fire support base. The paratroopers began their assault early on the morning of November 3rd. As they neared the top, they were met with heavy gunfire. In the manner of experienced fighters, the paratroopers moved forward in small groups, using the terrain for protection. However, since the enemy was well prepared and fought fiercely to hold their ground, the commander of the 503rd Infantry called in artillery support. Using the so-called beehive rounds, which consisted of thousands of steel darts, the artillery managed to create gaps in the enemy lines, which allowed the paratroopers to push forward. The battle turned into brutal, close-range fighting in which paratroopers cleared enemy bunkers one by one. By the afternoon, the paratroopers reached the top of Hill 823. The enemy, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat. Due to casualties suffered, Bravo Company was relieved the following day by the 1st Battalion of the 503rd Infantry Regiment. After the fire support base was established on top of the hill, the 503rd Infantry was divided into two task forces, black and blue. Both formations had the task of pursuing the enemy that previously occupied Hill 823 and destroying it. On November 10th, Task Forces Black and Blue left the hill in pursuit of the enemy. Task Force Black was following a communications wire left by the North Vietnamese. However, the trail led them straight into an ambush set up by the 8th and 9th Battalions of the NVA 66th Regiment. Faced with the sudden overwhelming fire, Task Force Black Commander Captain Thomas McElwain immediately called for help, which arrived with a one-day delay because of the thick jungle that slowed down the arrival of Task Force Blue. However, once they arrived, the combined forces managed to fight off the relentless NVA attacks. The hero of the day was Private First Class John Barnes, who performed an act of supreme heroism. As he was reloading the machine gun, Barnes spotted a hand grenade dropping near his position at the spot occupied by severely injured soldiers. Realizing that the grenade could kill them, Barnes sacrificed his life by throwing himself directly onto the hand grenade as it exploded. Although Lieutenant Colonel David Schumacher, commander of the 503rd Infantry, refused to endorse the award for what he called an act of suicide, John Barnes was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. By midday November 11th, enemy fire had decreased, allowing resupply helicopters to drop ammo, water, and rations. McElwain decided to pull back to a more defensible position. He formed a moving perimeter with some men covering while others retreated. The artillery provided a protective barrier that prevented the NVAs from following. In the end, combined forces reached the campsite and dug in while the artillery and spooky gunships provided cover through the night. At dawn, orders came to recover the dead and get an enemy body count. The battlefield was a mess, with bodies and equipment scattered all over the place, reflecting the severity of the battle. Paratroopers learned the hard way that the NVA and the Central Highlands were a tough opponent to break. While the paratroopers were fighting for their lives in the depths of the jungle, the NVAs had sneaked all the way to the Dak To base. On the night of November 12th, they launched a rocket and mortar assault against the Dak To airfield. The shelling lasted for 3 days and nights, during which NVAs destroyed 2 C-130 Hercules transport aircraft. On the third day, a mortar hit a storage of C4 explosives, creating an explosion so powerful it knocked out men at a distance of 1 mile. An all-round battle started in which the 2nd Platoon took particularly heavy fire. Alpha Company reported the situation and called for air and artillery support. Jets dropped bombs and napalm, but because of the thick cannon, now the course of battle changed as the NVA took the initiative and started launching human wave attacks. Paratroopers fought ferociously to hold their positions. The air and artillery support, although limited in their effectiveness, helped repel the NVA assault. While fighting the enemy, the paratroopers also had to protect a group of civilian correspondents, which had to be evacuated under fire. Millions of dead soldiers. However, facing the fiercest battle took place on the coast, known as Hill 875. On November 18th, while fighting was raging on Hill 882, a small Special Forces group encountered the NVA 174th Regiment in bunkers on the slopes of Hill 875. Anticipating heavy enemy resistance, the Special Forces and Montagnards pulled back and the 2 503rd was called in to clear the hill. Due to heavy losses in previous battles, the attacking force was only 290 troops instead of the expected 450. By afternoon, the company started moving to the base of Hill 875. That Delta Company, which had to dig in. At 1300, the 2 503rd resumed the attack. Charlie and Delta companies moved forward about 15 meters when they were hit again by heavy fire from an enemy bunker. They were up against a battalion of the NVA 174th, which was dug in on the top of the hill with 3 lines of trenches and interconnected bunkers. The 4 503rd attacked with 3 companies abreast. Bravo Company was in the center, with Charlie Company on the right and Alpha Company on the left. There was no reserve. However, the NVA was ready to fight too. They waited for the artillery and airstrikes to lift before opening fire that pinned down the 4 503rd. The battle raged all afternoon. Men of the 4 503rd reached the first line of trenches but suffered heavy losses, almost a third of their strength. Yet the 4 503rd continued to attack, determined to continue despite heavy losses. During that time, the 2 503rd was in the rear, reorganizing and collecting their dead. On November 22, 1967, the fighting on Hill 875 continued. Artillery and airstrikes pounded the hilltop all day. The smell of dead bodies and burnt trees spread across the entire hill. Constant attacks had caused heavy losses, and the 173rd Airborne Brigade had no reinforcements available. The soldiers were exhausted, hungry, and thirsty. Helicopters flew over the hill to drop supplies, but these often landed in enemy positions. There was less fighting on the 4th day, but the enemy was still present with their mortar rounds continuously tormenting the paratroopers. On November 23rd, Thanksgiving Day, the 4 503rd resumed the attack. Bravo Company was on the left, Charlie Company on the right, and Alpha Company in reserve. Meanwhile, the 112th Infantry, 4th Infantry Division, moved out from the valley to attack Hill 875. They moved up the hill, but encountered only light resistance. At 11:22 hours, they arrived at the top of Hill 875, where they met and 1,441 wounded. 40 helicopters were shot down during these 3 weeks of fighting. NVA 1st Division had far more casualties, with between 1,000 and 1,400 men lost. Its troops withdrew to Cambodia and Laos, yet the North Vietnamese were far from being defeated, as General Westmoreland claimed. This would become obvious just 2 months later when they launched the Tet Offensive. As for the men of the 173rd Airborne, they continued from the struggle they went through at Dak To and went on with the fighting. They continued to serve the only way they knew how, with courage and strength. Thank you for watching this episode. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel for more content. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified of our next drop into combat. Stay tuned.